Hello and welcome to Newspeak. I'm Peter Whittle. This is the New Culture Forum's weekly look at the news agenda. I'm joined by our two senior fellows, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, historian, royal commentator, and Dr. Philip Kiszely of Leeds University, cultural historian. There are a lot of stories this week which have one thing in common, and that is the Blob, as it's called. We've had a case of a whistleblower who's just got an out-of-court settlement given to her by the government. Her crime was that she tried to warn the government of political infiltration in her particular part of the civil service. We also had the case of the MP Andrea Jenkins being stopped from meeting certain well-known public figures such as Kathleen Stock and J.K. Rowling and Matthew Goodman, whom we've seen on this channel many times. Also, certain civil servants are threatening to strike over the government's Rwanda policy, which is quite extraordinary. As I said, these all have things in common. They all emanate from civil service. What is known as the Blob, that used to actually be something which was only applied to the educational establishment, but increasingly it is like a big slice of ideological opposition to the government, unelected. So we're going to be just looking at that. We will also be looking at, well, it is actually Pride Month. I hope you're going to celebrate. We will talk about that as well. But before we get to those points, something far weightier actually. Philip Schofield. Maybe you were perhaps hoping that this was going to be a Schofield-free zone, but I'm afraid not. This has dominated, from what I can see, the mainstream media. Not really our sort of areas as much, but to me, it's quite a crazy level of coverage. I mean,
absolutely. I mean, I was supposed to go on Talk TV, booked for a 20-minute slot to discuss real issues of immigration and housing shortage and so forth. Suddenly, because Philip Schofield had tweeted something on Instagram 10 minutes prior to coming on, that took up half of the show. And of course, I'm not au fait with, I'm not familiar with all of Philip Schofield's activities with poor old Gordon in the broom cupboard, but I had to start talking about this thing, and it's almost as if, we've got so many issues in this world, in this country particularly, which are of great importance, from inflation, immigration, to the cultural world. I mean, there's no end of problems that we're having right now. It's almost as if people aren't able to face those, and so something like this takes on all of the energy and further, which you would hope would be applied to cross-channel crossings. You'd hope would be applied to legal migration. You'd hope would be applied to housing. And all of the manifesto pledges that were broken by the government. But no, it's almost as if this is a release valve for people's anger, but it's very disturbing and sad to see that we are actually putting so much energy that could be put to such good use on something so superficial.
Yeah, I think there's something else happening as well. I mean, people are obviously involved in it and loving it because he's a pompous figure who's been knocked down, and he's been. Yeah, I think so. But there's something else as well. I mean, it's almost as if GB News, in the person of Eamon Holmes, is giving ITV and terrestrial television a really good kicking, and it's kind of symbolic of what they've been doing over the last 18 months or so. Really, if you think about this morning, they have about I read today about 500,000 viewing figures a day, not much more than that. Now that's really tiny, bearing in mind the hugeness of this story and how it's just infiltrated and taken over every single media outlet. But for me, I take away from it, this is a different kind of media. Yes, GB News is a television station, but it's pushing back on the establishment, pushing back on the old stuff, and saying no more.
That's actually the point about this. 500,000. I mean, I think they had 1 million, at their highest, which was a Christmas special or something like that. But what is extraordinary is that you are talking about really small amounts of people. But we all know who Philip Schofield is. He's been around for 25 years. Must be that kind of wholesome thing, which is what basically people are going for. And someone appears to be less and kind of angelic. But it's like, who knew? I mean, TV personalities are phonies, they say, all the way through, aren't they?
It's just insane. I mean, all of those people who are reading about this, they know who he is, like you say, but they don't watch the show. But it's indicative of so much else in our culture, isn't it? I mean, can anyone name who's in the top 10? Can you name any songs in the top 10, right? That's really interesting, because no one's interested anymore. Can you name any of these soap opera characters who are on the front cover of papers like The Mirror and The Sun, and big spreads about these particular people who've lost weight or put on weight, or they're wearing this, or they're seeing this person, and actually nobody really knows who they are. They don't. What it's a bizarre, it's a bizarre phenomenon, and this is the what Rod Liddell would call peak wank of that phenomenon, isn't it?
Or the dying embers of it too, because if you think, he's been part of our lives, for 40 years, essentially, right? And yet there aren't that many people still in daytime television or in television as a whole who have been around that long. So, and because he was there for people who are now the governing elite, he was there for them in their childhood. So I think he resonates with a lot of people. But it's the hypocrisy, I think.
Which is
this whole attempt to create this happy family of this morning. And as Eamon Holmes has been revealing, it's been the most dysfunctional family you could imagine. And the fakeness of Holly Willoughby and the fakeness of Philip Schofield. But again, people concerned about his antics or relationship with this young boy and whatnot. I'm sorry, we have whole-scale industrial rape of children in this country with Islamic rape gangs. Why aren't we giving 1/10 of the attention? It's not even 1/100th of the attention that gets. That's where my nose gets out of joint.
And it really illustrates the incestuousness of our media. It's a bit like Westminster. It's a bit like, well, we're going to talk about the civil service, but they're interested in it because it's them. It's their story, and it's their soap opera, and it's a good laugh for them. But as you say, all of these serious things are happening. They're happening outside of London. They're happening in the north. They're happening in deprived areas, and yet we're talking about this incredibly rich, incredibly privileged man who's been around for decades and doesn't seem to really do anything.
I think the thing is, we can say, oh, there are these important things going on. Of course, that's true. There always has been. But then equally, like you could say Jimmy Savile was just a kind of TV personality, right? And obviously there was a big scandal there. I'm not drawing a comparison. It's obviously entirely different. In some ways, that's the important thing. There does just seem to be schadenfreude about this. It's like it's really irritated a lot of people. Eamon Holmes, I felt, actually, I sort of thought, this is rather undignified of you, actually. That was my reaction to that.
Well, the British have long had, people often say they like going to America where everyone builds you up, and here they're just waiting to tear you down. And that is something that's very noticeable, actually, of the two cultures. If people like to pull people down, particularly when they see someone being arrogant and conceited and believing in their own publicity. But the thing is, the hysteria around this has got to the point where Savile has been mentioned in the same context as Schofield. You are seeing the greatest scandal since Jimmy Savile, the biggest scandal of a generation. And you think, wait a minute, okay, all right, it could be rather seedy and sordid what's going on,
but it's not wholesale abuse of children.
As far as we know, nothing illegal was done,
exactly,
right?
Yeah.
Unwise, not illegal was the phrase used. That's very different to the antics that Jimmy Savile was getting up to, or Rolf Harris was getting up to.
The thing is that what really put me off the guy, was that display when he came out as gay.
Yeah.
And and all this kind of, I found it kind of cringe making. I couldn't watch it. For goodness sake, it's positively a benefit to be gay in light entertainment. It's almost obligatory. I mean, it's not a, what about his wife? And he's got 2 daughters, hasn't he?
Yes, that's right.
But now we know why he came out as gay.
Exactly.
This is what Eamon Holmes has revealed, that he did it because the night before or the week before, this young lover of his had got drunk at the National Television Awards and expressed his undying love for Schofield and had to be ushered out, and was then moved out of This Morning onto the next show, Loose Women. Can't believe I'm discussing Loose Women on this programme. It's such a nonsense. But anyway, and it was just after that suddenly, and all that came to my mind actually was Kevin Spacey. Was it Kevin Spacey? Because you remember, he came out of the closet bravely. And of course, just after that, you got all the sex abuse allegations. It's almost as if this is a cover. I will get everyone's sympathy for being gay, and that will act as a buffer if anything else happens.
It depends what kind of mind you've got, how conspiratorial you are. But Katie Hopkins was really quite funny on this, because she was saying a similar kind of thing, and she was saying, "Oh well, the Sun are saying this because they want to deflect opinion away from this," usual kinds of things. But she did it with quite a lot of humour, and there is some kind of quite funny memes and funny stuff about this. I think as well, I think we should see it for what it is and really deride it as well, because these people, they if anybody does need pulling down a peg or two, it's people who work on daytime television, and they describe the show that we love this show is amazing, it's our family, we love this show. Yes, you could be really proud and pleased at doing your job, but it's this morning, for God's sake. Keep it in proportion.
Keep it in proportion. But you see,
or keep yourself in proportion. Keep yourself what you do in proportion.
But also, is it Nadine Dorries has sort of said that the government should hold an inquiry?
Yeah, but this is what I mean. This is hysteria.
This is like Alice in Wonderland, isn't it? You know,
I think Comedy Unleashed should hold an inquiry. Actually, that's more appropriate.
Yes,
let's have some fun with it. Let's send these people up, because they're really quite despicable, aren't they?
Yes. Well, back to the kind of, if you like, serious stuff that's been going on in the background, and that is about the Blob, as I mentioned before. It's a terrible term. I can't bear these half-humorous terms, because I think that they basically take away from the importance of it. But essentially what it's about is unelected political opposition in the civil service, or in all of the quangos, and how many other institutions we've discussed as well over the period of time. There have been all of these kind of cases, some of them actually very serious. So for example, if you look back, I mentioned it at the beginning, but if you look back to, say, Dominic Raab, and this kind of way in which Tory, I think he's actually standing down at the next election.
Yes.
I mean, basically, Conservatives or Tory ministers or whatever being taken down by accusations of bullying. It's all of a piece, is it not? I mean, wouldn't you say?
It's a kind of, we've talked about activism, and I've talked very specifically about activism. This is a kind of activism by stealth, in a way, isn't it? It's quiet. The public doesn't know that much about it until someone speaks out about it, as just happened. Yeah. But these are Kim Philby, Anthony Blunt type characters. They're just not. They're just. There isn't just the sensationalism around them. The really depressing thing about it for me is that there are so many of these people, and they come from arts and humanities degrees. There are hordes of them, and there's nothing else for them to do other than to work in the civil service, work in the NHS, managers in the NHS, work in education institutions. It's the human resources stuff, it's all of those things, and they wield so much power, and these organisations grow and grow and grow simply to hold them, all of these people with these qualifications with nothing else to do, and it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Before I should also mention that, because it is connected, and they are sort of civil servants, but in the RAF, there was a leaked email, which you might have seen, which was basically saying we basically can't have any more, quote, useless white pilots, right? I think the gist of the story was that they weren't getting enough ethnic minority and women candidates, whatever. So just because that was happening, they actually stopped all what they call the boards, which are essentially interviews, right? Because they knew. This was just amazing. You're talking about the security of the.
It was classic identity.
I mean, you're talking about people flying planes worth tens of millions of pounds, and you want the best candidate for the job. I don't care if they're green, as long as they can fly that thing. I would be green flying one of those things, as I'm sure many other people would. But I was just, there's one of the great tragedies of the 2019 general election, where we had so much hope, because Dominic Cummings had reform of the civil service as one of his top priorities. And back in 2019, people didn't really understand the Blob the way that we do now. And people will think, well, why is he so obsessed about this? Now, of course, knowing what we know now, we see how well he understood the problem, and how important it was to have a strategy there. Now, of course, COVID happened, and he got dismissed. Had it not been for that, I think that would be one of the best legacies of this administration. Would have actually been the reform and the restructuring and the ushering out of a lot of the civil service traditions. I was trying to think whether actually the Blob is the equivalent of the deep state in America, which I often thought as the establishment, right? They didn't have an establishment, but I'm not sure whether it is or not. But it is very scary when you have just the simple ability in this victim culture to say I was bullied, and if you get enough of your friends to say it, that will be enough to topple a giant.
I think the difference with the deep state, if there is one, is that in America it's always had this connotation of the intelligence services, that working behind the scenes and all that. But I think the great thing, surely, the good thing, let's face it, you say people didn't realise back in 2000, we've been banging on about this, we've written books about it. This is all, to me, part of the Long March. All part of the Long March. What do you think of this idea? You talk about restructuring and reforming. What about just simply getting rid of the notion of impartiality in the civil service? Say it is not working, it never really did work. We need, a bit like America, a politicised senior, maybe, civil service. Would you go along with that?
Well, impartiality doesn't work at all, so clearly we've got to do something else.
It's like the BBC, isn't it?
It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you're right, it never did. And as I say, the infiltration of it's so obscene. It's just it's like a second government, isn't it? Or the actual government is a puppet government because they just stop everything. Something needs to be done. I don't know about a politicised senior level. I honestly don't know, but I know something needs to be done.
I'm opposed to it instinctively. In much the same way that I'm opposed to the American practice of having ambassadors who are political appointments rather than career ambassadors. The issue is things are much worse now than they ever were before. You never saw this sort of thing happening. Look, just in recent memory, we have that wonderful what's his name, Armando Iannucci, the thick of it. Now, if that wasn't a testament to bullying, I don't know. That was the reality. Everybody was basically aggressive and nasty to each other. Now that might be an exaggeration, but the point was all of this stuff happened for all this stuff happened for generations. The civil service understood that they were partial, but they were impartial at work. One of the problems here is that the governments have been too weak in enforcing civil service rules. Secondly, another big dynamic here now is the lack of institutional memory within government departments. I mean that's whereby huge. You now have ministers and heads of department who move around, and so the civil service salary structure is designed for people to stay in a position for a bit, then move on to another position and work their way up the ladder. So then they're never in situ long enough to actually ensure that they can put in place.
Well, the civil service actually work on projects. They don't just stay in one place all the time, apart from the big mandarins. But if you're generally in a fairly high level in the civil service, and I know this because my brother is, if you're in a high level, you work on a project for a few years, 5 years, whatever it is, universal benefit, and then you move on to something else.
But that wasn't the case traditionally. I mean, look at the Foreign Office. You had people there who could speak Arabic who would be there for their entire course of action, unlike in America, which is why when they invaded after 9/11, they had no Arabic experts in there.
But Peter made this point about the Long March and the hollowing out of the institutions, the Kierkegaardian revolution, and you're absolutely right. They have no loyalty or no commitment to the institution whatsoever. So how can you expect them to see beyond their prejudice, which is an identitarian prejudice, and how can you expect them to not play the bullying card, or not play the race card, or not play the gender card?
So I mean, again, it's we often talk about traditions or notions in this country. For example, we've talked about patriotism and that why we don't need to fly flags, and then you sort of think, well, actually, wait a minute, the whole paradigm has changed. We do need to fly flags now, right? I feel that's about this kind of thing. I think it was a wonderful thing, Sir Humphrey and all of that, and you sort of think how reassuring. But I so don't think these people have got our best interests at heart. That's the difference.
Yeah, well, they certainly don't.
And
it's
so I'd be happy to have a kind of more politicised.
Well, maybe it's about continuity, isn't it? And it's that Burkean thing of tradition. It's that Burkean thing of handing something on. And if that isn't there at the root, at the core of Westminster and Whitehall, then that's. We can't turn it round. The problem is this isn't fixable even in one generation, because we're so far gone on every level of society. So without sounding, completely and utterly doom and gloom, there isn't one fix-all to it. I think it's a generational thing.
That thing about the RAF pilots.
Yeah.
I mean, a couple of friends, I sent it to just people we know here, and really demoralised by it. I mean, this is a story that's been going on anyway, isn't it, about them? But sort of, what they were saying, actually, why don't we leave the country? I mean, if you're talking about your armed forces, particularly one that's, I'd say that the RAF has always been very fondly regarded, actually, in this country. And you just think, what is the matter? Can a country survive this level of pathology, that's going on?
Well, you can't help but compare this attitude to pilots and RAF pilots, the attitude that we had in 1941 to Spitfire pilots. The Battle of Britain, they saved us. It's the same thing. Well, if we took this attitude back in time, we would have lost the war.
I mentioned there Kathleen Stock as being one of the people, J.K. Rowling, Matthew Goodwin, who basically couldn't meet, or rather Andrea Jenkins, when she was a minister under Boris Johnson, was prevented from meeting them by nefarious means. Do you know what I mean? They kept putting on. She's had a bit of a week, hasn't she, Kathleen Stock? I mean, she was on our programme all last year, and I mean, I just liked her instinctively in regards to him. But she was at Oxford this week, wasn't she? And she also did a programme called The Gender War.
On Channel 4.
Did you see it?
It was. No, I mean, there's just been so much talk about it. I'm gendered up to here at the moment with all of that stuff on. So I purposely avoided it. But as you say, I like her and I like what she says, and I think she's so articulate and she's so sensible, and actually she's so kind as well. And I think Julie Bindel was on it, and I think they push back against this stuff.
But it was such that, but this has been I don't know why, but we often hear about people being deplatformed, but this case for some reason touched all of the light papers throughout the media. I mean, you even had Rishi Sunak entering the discussion on this. It's been called the biggest scandal to hit the Oxford Union since David Irving and Nick Griffin spoke there in 2007, and there are articles about that. And I'm like, excuse me, you are comparing Kathleen Stock, a very mild-mannered person who is espousing views shared by the majority of this country, that is observable to the scientific eye, and now
with a Holocaust denier
being equated with two Holocaust deniers. I mean, it's a remarkable situation that we have here, and it's an important discussion that we're having now, because we're just having the Free Speech Commissioner being appointed by the Prime Minister, who's a Cambridge academic.
Arif Ahmed.
A Cambridge academic who has a good track record on training students in free speech, and he's been empowered to actually take action over student unions.
But the difficulty with that is that's a top-down thing. It's really not going to work. You need to get academics, you need to get students on the side of free speech. You can't just have a SAR to step in and say, we've got to change this, we've got to do that. I don't think it's going to work. It might make some change, but it's not going to make fundamental change. The one thing I did want to say was there was a protester yesterday, wasn't there? This girl who glued her hand
John T. Twittington,
who glued her hand to the floor. She was privately educated, £41,000 a year, the school that she went to, and has gone to
just like Just Stop Oil, Extinction Rebellion.
Yeah, so it's a mind disease, it's a mind virus that these very rich, very privileged young people have, and we need to understand it, help them, and cure them.
I've actually asked this new free speech, Mr. Ahmed, onto the channel, by the way. I hope he kind of gets back, because he actually did do something good, didn't he? He was behind, was it Cambridge, changing the wording of just respecting religion to tolerating. I think that was largely.
So that's what was enabled other academics to support the policy. But I'll disagree with you slightly here, Philip, about the effectiveness that he will have as this free speech czar, because what his existence already you're seeing is emboldening students who don't agree with all of this nonsense. And now that they know that the government is taking some sort of action with this bill and with these protections that are guaranteed, and you've actually seen now, because of this legislation, Oxford University forcing the Oxford Students' Union not to cut off funding for the Oxford Union, which is a separate organisation. But you had 100 students signing a letter in defence of Kathleen Stock.
Yeah.
And I don't think you'd have had that happening a year ago or so. And so I think these things from top down are actually signs that students will be supported, or their encouragement. If there was no one doing anything, you could see why students would be even less likely to actually put their heads up above the parapets.
I think it's
just to come back to that, I don't disagree that it will make some change. Okay, and 100 students signing something is really good. But bearing in mind where I work, there are 33,000 students on that campus. You know, it is a drop in the ocean.
Oh yeah. Every journey begins with the first step.
and every journey does begin with the first step. But what will happen is that things will just kind of move around the side. You know, things that are not policy will be implemented anyway. So there's quite a lot of stuff around trans that actually isn't policy.
I'm not hopeful
in schools,
but I just think this is a good start.
Yeah,
we have to give compliments on praise where it's deserved.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a very long, hard
Well,
road.
the point is we've got to support it.
Yeah.
we support it. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, there are sort of two issues on there really. There's this one which gets some sort of publicity. There's the much wider one, which in a way is that the orthodoxies at these colleges has taken up so much that basically they're actually useless now. I mean, you know, which is the Roger Scruton view that somehow humanities are kaput. You know, they're beyond saving. And the sheer ignorance. I mean, when you went, you know, the sheer ignorance of these students, you know, who basically had probably never heard the discussions. Was it the Oxford Union?
Yeah, no, I was at the Cambridge Union, which is actually the oldest debating union in the world. And now I've had over 1.6 million people have watched this, and 95% of the comments aren't about me; they're about the students, because what everyone has been amazed at has been the inability of people, firstly, to sit still and hear an argument, but also their complete shock at hearing historical facts, not opinion. I was simply delivering facts. That yes, there were as many slaves in Africa as were transported over. They had never heard that. That the British stopped the burning of Indian widows on the funeral pyre of their husbands, and women were shaking their heads in the audience. And you just thought, these aren't school children. These are people who've never actually been told the opposing side to an argument. All they've been told is theory. I'm presenting facts now, and they simply couldn't take it. And so many commentators from America and elsewhere have said how disheartening it was, because Cambridge and Oxford still have this great cachet around the world, and to see the reality is so depressing. And I last spoke at the Cambridge Union 7 years ago, and you could really note the decline in the quality of students over the past 7 years. Even IQ levels, I could say. They were a stupider bunch now than they were 7 years ago, because of quotas needing to be filled and so forth. And I can only imagine what it will be like in another 7 years.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I keep coming back to activism, because that's what the degrees are. They're not They are not an intellectual exploration. Universities are not a marketplace of ideas. They are. It is a platform for activism, and they are led completely and totally by emotion. So it isn't about ideas. It's about ideas to a certain extent, as long as they're a certain set of ideas that are all coherent in one particular way. But the minute you challenge that or push back on that, the emotion kicks in, and you can see it on the face of those students. They don't know what to do. They become very distracted. They become very upset. And there's a point of no return in these conversations, and it's very depressing when you have it in a classroom where you just cannot continue because you know someone's going to start crying.
Do you know, one thing about, because this is all related, isn't it? I mean, it's related to the Blob, all of that.
Yeah.
The one thing I think which gives me sort of a hope is that they're out in the open. We've said this before, but it's out in the open. It takes a long time for the penny to drop for many people, particularly when all you're doing is watching Philip Schofield and all of that. But essentially, after a while, it kind of does. People are sort of see it, you know, they can join the dots after a while. They sort of think, wait a minute, you know, he's gone, she's gone, they're stopping this, they're stopping that. This is all coming, this is all at the same time, and it seems rather concerted.
Yeah.
You know? Do you not think?
People, well, loads of people get in touch with you in particular, don't they? But people get in touch with us as well. Lots of people get in touch with me asking about education. What about my daughter or my son or my granddaughter, whatever, going to university? What do you think?
Yes.
Where should they go? Because I'm worried that people seeing this, people are worried that universities are just indoctrination camps. They see them as indoctrination camps. Now that's different to how it was 5 or 6 years ago. Now that's education. Now we're looking at the civil service. We're looking at how Whitehall works. We're looking at how Westminster is supported, and we're seeing the same thing. So it's like you said before, it's this penny dropping thing. And it reminds me of Robbie Williams. We talked about Robbie Williams, was it last week or the week before, when he said, you can't trust anything anymore. I only live for my family, my house, my children, because everything else is just nonsense. It doesn't work anymore, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah, no, I know. Also, what's going to happen with particularly like along Whitehall and this coming month is that all of these ministries are going to have the what is the flag called now? It's not just called LGBT flag.
Progress flag.
Progress flag. Is that what it's called?
Is that what it is?
This is the rather ugly, whatever you think of the issues, rather ugly. It looks to me like an old Neapolitan ice cream. It's sort of like blue and brown and all of these colours. Yeah.
Actually, if you, I saw a meme, and viewers might have seen it, but if you arrange 4 of the flags in a particular way, the brown bits make a swastika.
Well, no, that's what got Lawrence into serious trouble.
Oh, was it that? Right,
yeah,
okay.
Harry Miller's just put it up again.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the thing is about this is that this is a front now on the cultural warfare, and frankly, why have a month? I mean, a Pride month, for goodness sake. It seems to me rather like the argument about racism that came up after George Floyd. It's just somehow or other we were going along, probably less the least racist we've been, not really encouraging people, and then suddenly now everything is racist, and it's not unlike it with Pride in the sense that for goodness sake, there was a really good reason for Pride maybe in the 1960s and 70s, which there was. But I mean, frankly, now, what is this? It's a strange corporate kind of orgy going on, isn't it, really?
Well, Pride is a very different thing to gay rights. You're talking about gay rights. And that was
gay lib.
Gay lib, that was desperately needed. Pride is something else, isn't it? Pride is an imposition. Pride infiltrates every walk of life. So I know that the post office van is going to have a pride flag all over it. When I go to the train to get a ticket, there are going to be flags bunting all over the place. It's indoctrination. It's the colonization of culture.
But also, sort of what it does, it actually kind of it's cajoling, because people walk across those zebra crossings. I remember there was one in Woolwich when I was still living in Woolwich, and most of the people in
Woolwich, I'm sure, would have.
I mean, really are not. They're not going to have having any of it really. But you have to cross it, or you have to go up these stairs in this particular school, and it is just everywhere. I mean, it is just. People say, "Oh, there'll be a backlash." I don't see will there be a backlash. I think people have just simply accept it now. You just absolutely got to accept it. But it is just irritating, and it's going to go on for about a month. Anyway, we've got a bottle of champagne. Yes, actually, people do call it shampoo. You've got a bottle of champagne.
You sound like an East End villain in 1975.
Because it's this fellow's birthday today.
Yes, thank you so much.
Happy birthday to
36.
Yes, looking very well on it, Rafe. And so what are you going to do for your birthday then?
Of course, having to drink now.
Have a drink, yes.
And down on the coast, have a nice long weekend down by
lovely.
Seven Sisters.
Yes,
And, all of that.
exactly. I didn't know you had 7 sisters. Well. Anyway, look, that was a good old talk, I think.
Yeah.
Nice for your birthday. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you as well, everybody, for watching. And do watch again next week. We're on a bit of a roll at the moment with this programme, pleased to say. So keep it up and see you next time. Bye. Hello. If you're enjoying the New Culture Forum channel and you believe in our mission, may I invite you to join our membership scheme at the link below or on our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Our work is more important now than ever, and we have great plans ahead for the future, but we can't do it without your support. From as little as £3 per month, you can help ensure that we continue on our mission. As a member, you'll receive a range of benefits, including access to exclusive content, invitations to our private events, including here at our studios, free copies of our books, and much, much more, including, of course, our famous NCF mug. If you aren't able to become a member, then please help us by clicking this button and subscribing to our channel. It's completely free. Just remember to also click the bell icon so that you can get notifications when we post new videos. Thank you.